So I was doing sort of like 5'10" face climbing, and this is all like onsite solo, except that there were like sheets of ice over big sections of the pitches.
It's funny hearing the veneer of ice on the wall. It's like there's that Peter Croft quote that you really like about like,
You can climb in the rain, just not as hard.
yeah,
Yeah.
I don't feel like that works for ice on the walls.
This is Climbing Gold.
What do you think the most frightening or full-on experience climbing you've ever had is?
I mean, like, who freaking knows? I'm like Rolodexing all the scary, though most of them are climbing with a rope, either doing first ascents or thinking that I'm off route, or just generally having total misadventures while roped up, but just getting into things that were a disaster. Now, I mean, like one that comes to mind is like leading the last pitch of this route in Antarctica, uh, which I think I wound up calling 10DX in you know, TC Pros the size of my street shoes with like ski socks on and a ton of layers and freaking freezing cold temps with just no protection on terrible rock. It's always like scary climbing with something extra where it's like, oh, it's kind of scary and I think I'm off route and I don't know if it'll go to the summit or not, and things like that. Like one of my scariest climbing experiences for much of my life was this route I climbed in the Needles in California. It was like Granite Spires in the Sierra Nevada with an ex girlfriend way long time ago. I was like just learning how to trad climb, and I think the route was, I don't know, like 11 plus or 12 minus or something, a couple pitches. But I did, maybe it was like 12B, and I did the crux pitch, and then I was going to link it with a 511 pitch to the summit. But then the 511 pitch totally changed character, and the rock quality got way worse. And the topo just showed like a line with a couple bolts, but it turns out the bolts were these like ancient quarter-inch, like rusted old bolts that had been placed to avoid this giant death block in the corner. The kind of thing where like, oh, you're supposed to clip those to keep your rope from touching this thing that will probably fall off and like cut your rope and kill everybody. And so basically, because I was linking the pitches, I was already basically out of gear. I had terrible rope drag, and then I got into the stuff, and the rock quality went way down, and the protection got way worse. And long story short, I basically clawed over the top of the mountain with nothing on my harness except for my belay device. Like I placed every single thing that I had, and I had half a meter of rope left. And the whole time I was up there, like gripped out of my mind, trying to figure out how to get to the top. My like then girlfriend was down at the anchor being like, I'm cold, can we go down? And I was like, I'm cold too. And basically at any point I would have bailed if I thought I could, but I couldn't get any gear to lower off of, and I was already like too far out to lower back to the anchor, and it was kind of early on and I was kind of inexperienced anyway, and it was all just like I would have given up if I could, but I didn't know how, so I was just like, keep going up. And I think that's the common thread through all.
What route was that?
I think it might be called Nautilus. I think in the Needles, I remember where it is. It's on the backside of one of the spires. It's just like, I think maybe the first pitch is like a popular 512 maybe, and then it's like quite hard 511 supposedly to the top. I thought it was crazy though. It'd be interesting to go back now as more of an adult though and see if it's maybe not as crazy as I remember. But I think a common thread through all of my scariest trad climbing experiences has been continuing to move forward, assuming that things will get better, and things just don't get better. Where you're like, oh, the rock is bad, but I'm sure it'll get better if I punch it a little further. And then you punch it further, and now you're in an even more serious situation, and the rock is even worse. And you're like, oh no. It's like that. I think that's basically the main thing in all my scariest climbing experiences.
I would take a similar approach. I think sometimes when I find myself in that like run out bad rock or whatever, it's like the worst thing you could kind of do is to stop, because like that doesn't make your situation any better. Like you're not, maybe, I mean, if you're trying to get gear in, that's great, but like just sitting there and being like, wow, this is a terrible predicament, doesn't actually improve anything you're dealing with.
Yeah, though generally you should either turn around immediately and be like, oh, it turns out this isn't the situation I want, or just commit to the full adventure and just punch it. And I mean, I think I generally have punched it, and you do wind up with your most exciting experiences that way. Not to say that you always should, maybe, but it does always make for a memorable experience. I mean, I'm thinking of like on-site soloing new routes in various places, and like on-site downsoling new routes in places like Expedition to Chad, down climbing these towers. I was like tagging towers because no one had ever been there, so anything you did was a first ascent, which is pretty cool. And so then you feel an obligation to just like tag as many towers as you can, because when else do you get opportunities like that in life? But the rock quality was horrendous, and so sometimes you would sort of eke by on the way up. You'd sort of make it happen, but then you'd be like, oh, I don't want to repeat that on the way down. So you're like, oh, I'll try a different way down. But then sometimes you get into something even worse on the way back down, and you're like, oh, geez, mountain climbing. It's always an adventure. Or like, man, okay, speaking of mountain climbing, I had this totally insane. Have you heard of the route the Thaw's Not Holding Right in Patagonia? It's on the south face of De La S. It's like the smallest little mountain at the beginning of the range, but the south side of it's actually quite big. It's like a couple 1,000-foot rock face, it seems like. It's kind of clever. It was put up by Kevin Thaw, Leo Holding, and Cedar Wright. So like the Thaw's Not Holding Right. I know. I think it's really clever. I appreciate clever names. But on a relatively bad weather day, I was in Patagonia climbing with Colin Haley, but basically conditions weren't good. And so we weren't going to go climb anything real. But I was like, oh, it's the closest thing to town. I was like, I can just run in, try to solo this route on the south face, and then kind of run back to town and kind of squeak in this 12-hour weather window. And and basically I got there, got up onto the route, and it's like really big. And the upper head wall had like ice flows all over it. And so I was doing sort of like 510 face climbing, and this is all like on-site solo, except that there were like sheets of ice over big sections of the pitches. And so I was making like big detours trying to, I was like, oh God, like I don't, I can't really face climb on ice. It's like weird, like a veneer over sections of it. And so then I started looking at making big detours, like, oh, maybe I can like get to this other system and then down climb this corner for several hundred feet to get over to this other huge corner way over there and then follow that. But that's all getting into like on-site soloing first ascent sort of terrain, whereas like nobody's climbed any of these features. So it'd be like just a total adventure. Anyway, long story short, I basically persevered on mostly the original line, but with big face climbing things around the ice. And it was all very, very exciting. And then by the time I got to the top, then I down climbed the other side of the mountain, and that was all snowy and also sort of adventurous. And then you have to cross the glacier to get back to town. And by the time I finally got back to town, I was like, that was a lot more of an outing than I thought it would be, because conditions were just like a lot more full on than I expected.
Yeah, it's like it's funny hearing the veneer of ice on the wall. It's like there's that Peter Croft quote that you really like about like,
You can climb in the rain, just not as hard.
yeah,
Yeah.
I don't feel like that works for ice on the walls.
Though actually, I remember on some of the stuff I was actually holding ice. If it's like a flat 2-pad edge or something that's covered in ice, I mean, you can like use it for balance very, very carefully. You're sort of like, oh, geez, it was all very scary.
Would you repeat it?
Well, if it was like sunny out, yeah, it'd be beautiful. It was a great route. It was like beautiful rock. No, I mean, I think if I were to go and solo a route like that again, I would have more of a plan. I would in retrospect, I probably should have. The thing that kind of suckered me into it, and this is the through line for so many of these experiences, is that you've gone too far to turn back. It feels like when you've gone, like in this case on that particular route, it was like several thousand feet of sort of alpine ridge scrambling to get up onto this big upper face. And so by then you've already done literally thousands of feet of elevation gain and a bunch of climbing before you actually get to the hard part. And so by then you're kind of like, well, I'd rather just push through a few more sections of ice than to down climb thousands of feet of alpine ridge. You're just like, oh, I'm sure I can find a way past this one icy crimp rather than reverse this entire mountain. And so I feel like that's when you really sucker yourself into big experiences. When you're like, oh, I can just, like, it's the classic thing when you get lost and you don't ask for directions and you're like, I'll just keep going and I'm sure I'll figure out the way.
Yeah, yeah. Like except most of us are like having to go to the gas station, and you're just like alone on some face out there. They're like, what? That's crazy.
I
I think
know.
that's called. Was that the sunk cost? You're like, oh
Yeah, the sunken cost fallacy. Like with gambling, when you keep throwing good money after bad, you're like, I've already lost 10 grand, but I'll just throw in another five and see if I can win it back. Yeah. Thinking about that route, I'm like, I don't even know if that route is on my list of routes that I'm proud of, like soloing wise. I should look at my soloing list, because I'm like, that is a freaking crazy, crazy solo. Actually, I'm gonna look at my list right now. I haven't looked at this in a long time. Sort of like, I haven't even thought about that in a long time.
Will you show us like what you're looking at right now?
I'm pulling
Is
up.
this your journal?
Uh, no, I'm just on my phone looking at a list of. Let's see. Somewhere in here, I have a list of proud solos, but it's like a ways down because I haven't used it in forever. Let's see. Proud solos list. Haven't looked at it in 2 years. Oh no, I do have. Yeah, Thaw's not holding right on site. That's on here, as it should be because it was pretty
Because it
exciting
was
actually.
proud.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Hey, actually, that's funny on this list. It's the next thing after Freerider. I guess maybe I went that winter. So I mean, yeah, I guess that was the year after I soloed El Cap. Yeah, it just goes to show that if you can free solo El Cap, you can also free solo Icey 510 in the mountains.